So this happened a few months ago, and I still don't know what to really think about it. My name is Caleb, and I'm originally from Ohioville, Pennsylvania. I'm currently a junior at Brooklyn University, but my family still lives in my home state, so I drive back late at night for the holidays, when traffic is lighter. This story happened when I was driving home for spring break of this year. I was going to meet a friend in my hometown, and from there, we would head to Nashville. It was around 3 a.m., and I was driving along Kelly Road, which is out near Ohioville. People have always said it was haunted or tied to cult activity. Honestly, I thought it was just some local legend type crap to attract tourists. That was until this happened. I was tired, but pushing through it. The windows were cracked, and the music was low to keep me awake. At some point, I noticed smoke rising from the woods off to my right. At first, I thought someone's house was on fire, and if that was true, I needed help. I slowed down and pulled off onto a dirt patch on the side of the road. When I got out of the car, I immediately felt this weird, heavy vibe, like the air itself didn't want me there. But I started walking toward the smoke anyway, using my phone's flashlight to guide me. That's when I started hearing chanting. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I was pretty tired after all, and even despite the stories, Kelly Road has always had a creepy vibe at night. But the closer I got, the clearer it became. It was low voices, all in sync, saying something that I couldn't understand. I finally peered through the trees, and my stomach dropped. There were 10, maybe 15 people in robes or cloaks, standing in a circle around a fire. And this next part, I swear I saw with my own 2 eyes. They were throwing dead animals into the flames. I saw a goat for sure, and something else I couldn't recognize, perhaps a sheep. The smell of burning fur hit me, and I gagged. One of the robed figures then turned their head and made direct eye contact with me. That's when I realized I had to get the hell out of there. I instantly booked it, and of course, I tripped over a massive branch and hit my head on the ground. As I got back up, my ears were ringing. I noticed that I could no longer hear the chanting. That silence was worse than anything, because I knew that meant they were coming for me. I didn't know where they were, or if they were going to kill me. I sprinted back to my car, not even looking behind me as I fumbled with my keys. I heard footsteps crashing around through the woods across from me, but it was too dark to see. I jumped in, locked my doors, started the engine, and floored it. My headlights caught 2 of them at a tree line, just as I sped off. They were still in their robes, staring at me. Here's the part that messes with me the most. After a few minutes of driving at about 70 miles per hour, I slowed to 45. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw faint headlights behind me. At first, I thought it was just another driver on the road, but then I noticed they weren't gaining on me or falling back. They just seemed to be stopped in the middle of the road, maintaining their distance. No matter how fast I went, those headlights stayed there, almost like they were keeping pace with me, but being careful not to get too close. I checked my pockets for my phone so I could call 911, but it wasn't there. I had dropped it in the forest when I fell. There was literally no way I could call for help. I was looking around my car, hoping it was there, somewhere. When I looked in my rearview mirror, the headlights were still about 150 feet behind me. Then, they suddenly vanished. Not like they turned off down another road. They were just gone. The second they disappeared, my radio went haywire. The smell of burning fur filled my car. I swear I almost drove off the road from fear. I didn't stop until I hit the gas station about 30 minutes away. I sat there in the parking lot, shaking, staring at the woods across the street, half expecting to see someone stepping out in a robe. My hands smelled like smoke, even though I hadn't been that close to the fire. The next day, I went out and got a new phone. When I got back home, there was a goat horn on the welcome mat next to my old phone, which was covered in mud. I've only told this story a couple of times because I know how insane it sounds. But it's true. I lived it, and I can't stop replaying it in my head like a horror film. I know that I'm 21 years old, and I shouldn't be scared of this kind of stuff, but I'm horrified that they will come back to my parents' house. From now on, every time I head back to Pennsylvania, I take the long way around. I'd rather burn a few extra gallons of gas than ever set foot on Kelly Road ever again. This happened when I was 4 years old, and I only remember parts of it. So I had my mom tell me the full story once I was older. When I was younger, we would go stay at my aunt's house whenever my mom's side of the family would come to visit. They had a Labrador retriever, and I was hypersensitive to dogs. I could still be around them for short periods of time. Unfortunately, I got a rash, and it spread down to my nether regions. My mom said it was because I wasn't washing my hands properly before using the restroom. Right when we got back home, she took me to a dermatologist in Allentown because it seemed to be getting worse. Neither of my parents used a dermatologist before, so they asked friends for a recommendation. My mom is a doctor herself, so she looked into this guy before she took me to him, and he seemed to have a good reputation at the time. When we met with him, and I actually do remember parts of this, he checked over everything and said there wasn't much to be worried about, and prescribed me a steroid for it. He then asked my mother if he could take pictures of the rash to document it for research. Now, my mother being a doctor herself, she understands the utility behind using cases for research. I know this firsthand because I've been used for a study before when I had a hip surgery at a young age, but she felt something was off about this. She said she wouldn't have thought he was asking this in a creepy way. If it was some kind of rare case, she would agree it should have been documented. But the biggest red flag was that he had just said it was a common condition and not to worry about it. My mom being in medicine knows this means there is already extensive research on it, and a picture of a common rash wasn't necessary. She declined and forgot all about it. That was until we saw him on the news. Dr. Robert J. Thompson was charged with possessing more than 200 sexually explicit photos of children stored in several of his home computers. Thompson worked in Allentown and Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He was arrested by FBI after a 2-year investigation that began with a probe of individuals trading CP over AOL servers. So, yeah, big thanks to my mom for protecting me from this monster. Last summer, my boyfriend and I went camping in a nature preserve in rural Pennsylvania. I can't remember the name. It was pretty primitive camping, and we saw 2 other people there in the entire place. My boyfriend said these 2 people seemed off to him right away. I honestly don't know if they had anything to do with what happened that night, but I'll describe them anyways. The first person was a woman who had her truck parked off the trail and the hood open. I don't really notice these types of things, but my boyfriend said it looked to him like she was waiting for someone to pull off beside her and offer to help her with her truck. Normally, my boyfriend is the type to at least offer to call someone, but she skeeved him out enough to where he didn't even want to draw her attention more. The next person we saw drove by the campsite several times while we were setting up. He just kept driving by slowly and looking at us. I didn't even notice until my boyfriend pointed out that he had already done that twice. Whether these two people had anything sinister going on or not, the real story has to do with what woke us up around 3 a.m. It was incredibly loud and sudden. I couldn't describe it or even compare it to anything, but my boyfriend said it sounded to him similar to a chain gun revving up or someone using a large tool to scrape gravel. My boyfriend jumped up and looked out the window of the tent. The sound happened again. And again. And it was getting noticeably closer each time. I was about to piss myself, but my boyfriend told me it was probably a few miles off. I didn't question this because loud noises can be heard from miles off, right? Well, later he actually told me that he only said that because he didn't want to scare me, and that it actually sounded like it was coming from right down the dirt road. At one point he said he suspected it was right in front of our campsite. The only reason he didn't tell me to get up and dart out of the tent to the car was because he was afraid it could have been someone trying to scare us out of the tent. He whispered for me to go back to sleep. However, I couldn't, because every little sound I heard coming from outside sounded like someone trying to sneak up to our tent. Eventually, my boyfriend got up and told me to help him pack. It was maybe 20 minutes after that the sound finally stopped. He held our only weapon out in front of him, a machete. There was a full moon out that night, and our surroundings were well lit. While we were packing, I noticed an empty beer can close to our dead campfire. It wasn't there when we had gone to sleep around 10 p.m., and neither of us had brought any beer. Thankfully, we got out of there, and for the rest of that trip, we either camped in areas that were well populated by other campers, or we just got a hotel room. I go hunting every season, and I love it. More often than not, I don't kill in a game, but I enjoy the experience of going out into the woods with a certain goal in mind. I don't know if anyone listening is familiar with hunting seasons in Pennsylvania, but during late November, rifle season is in full swing. It was already the second week of the season, and I had yet to bag any deer, so I was eager to get to it early in the morning. I normally would get up around 5 a.m. and drive to my hunting spot. It's private land that my grandfather owns. Him and I are the only ones who hunt on it. I initially planned on calling my grandfather when I woke up and asking him if he wanted to tag along, but the weather that morning was horrendous. Snow was coming down, and the wind was pretty strong. I enjoy hunting in the snow, but my grandfather doesn't, so I knew that he probably wouldn't want to go. The roads were really bad out that day, so it took me a bit longer to get there. Normally, the sun would be starting to rise by now. However, it was a gloomy overcast and snowing. Regardless, I walked up to my spot. It was directly behind my grandfather's house, over a hill, and back about 100 yards. Almost immediately upon getting there, I hear things moving all around me. Honestly, I didn't pay it much mind. It could have been any number of things. Plus, it was still pitch dark. The thought of it being a deer had crossed my mind, but there wasn't much I could do about it at that moment. I had yet to set up my gear, so I just ignore it and continue preparing. It wasn't much longer after that I began hearing something walking just over the ridge to my right. At this point, there's barely enough light to see my feet. However, I could tell it wasn't a deer. I just assumed it was my grandfather walking to his spot, which is just a short distance away from mine. But the lights in his house were still off, and if he was hunting up here today, I'm sure he would let me know prior. But if it wasn't him, it was probably another hunter, albeit hunting illegally. I still wanted to warn them I was here, so I turned on my flashlight and pointed in that direction, flashing it several times. Nothing much happened after that. The noise stopped. I didn't hear anyone turn back, so I figured one of two things. They either sat right there after seeing my light, or I simply didn't hear them walking off. An hour or so passes, and finally the first sights of daylight start to shine through. It's still snowing, falling in entire snowballs, rather than snowflakes, so visibility was still pretty limited. But I just bared it. Even if I couldn't see any deer, I still found the weather to be quite pleasant. It was around this time that I noticed an odd-looking lump protruding out from a group of trees. It was around where I had heard that movement earlier. It appeared to be a mound of dirt. However, it was sticking out from the side of a tree. Naturally, I raised my rifle up to take a closer look. I could tell immediately that I was looking at the side of an older style camouflage coat. It took a minute, but it finally clicked. That was a person over there. So I didn't know what to do about it. I knew that he was hunting on our land illegally, and from what I could see, he wasn't wearing any orange, which is required for anyone who's hunting. And I could tell just from looking at them, whoever this was not my grandfather. I sat there for a moment debating on my next move, but I decided to call my granddad, at the risk of blowing his hunt if it really was him over there. So without taking my eyes off of this guy, I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. He picked up, and I told him what was going on. He said that he would be on his way shortly, but I decided on my own to whistle at the trespasser to let him know that I could see him. He didn't react at all. After a few minutes, I got up and began walking toward him. After walking a short distance, I could clearly see him. He appeared to be sleeping between a shrub and a couple of trees. He obviously thought out where to lay down as well, as I never would have been able to see him had his coat not stuck out. I whistled again, much louder this time, and he woke right up, almost immediately scrambling to hide his exposed coat. He had a nasty scruffy beard and a gray hat. Honestly, he looked like a harmless old homeless man, maybe in his 50s. But he had a perfect view of my grandfather's house from his spot, and I have a pretty good idea of what he was planning on doing once my granddad left the house. Once this guy realized he had been caught and saw me, a 6'5" guy with a hunting rifle less than 10 yards away, his face went pale. Almost instantly, he started to feed me some bullshit that he had gotten lost during a drive with a group of other hunters. A drive is a coordinated push through a thicket in order to drive deer to hunters sitting at the designated area. However, the closest public hunting land is miles from here, so I knew this was a lie. He just kept going on about how he got lost and fell asleep. He even went as far as to make up a fake name on the spot. I just stood there and listened, making sure he didn't make any suspicious movements. I can't help but to think of what this guy could have done to my grandfather. God knows he had the chance, and that thought pissed me off enough to tell the guy to shut the fuck up. It was around that point that I saw my grandfather. After he got there, we practically dragged this guy down to the road, where my granddad called the cops, and I called my dad. Technically, this guy hadn't done anything yet, so all we could do was charge him with trespassing and stalking. That was about a month ago, and since then, I haven't heard anything else about him. So my nephew listens to your channel, and he convinced me to write this up so it could be sent in. I grew up in Huntington, Pennsylvania. I went off to college in New York in 2005. That next summer, I came back home, and me and a few childhood friends decided to finally do something that we have been talking about since our early teens, but never pulled off. It was our way of getting back to our roots. While many of us were going off to college, or just being bogged down by adult life, Raystown Lake sits about 15 miles from Huntington, and all the locals know of the legend of Raystown Ray. It's a lake monster people have claimed to have spotted over the years. The legend has become a bit commercialized in recent decades, but the lore runs deep in this area. The lake itself is a massive man-made lake with plenty of depth for a large, shadowy creature to loom. That night, we decided to get our own photo of the thing, or a close encounter story to tell. It would be something that kept us tied to each other and where we come from. Fast forward to the morning of the departure. We had planned it all out and bought supplies, tents, sleeping bags, flashlights, food, chairs, etc. We got each other hyped up for something that was going to be truly memorable by celebrating with beer and other recreational substances the night before. A couple of the guys dropped out, of course, but it ended up being myself and 3 of my friends, Eddie, Jay, and Ben. Ben was the hothead / risk taker of the group. I drove us out there, and we dropped the kayaks into the water and pushed off from a cove tucked behind a few ridges where it felt like it was just us out there. We paddled around for a couple of hours and came back with exactly nothing. Waste of a trip, right? We sort of had a backup plan. We figured that we would camp around the James Creek area and at least spend some good old bro time out there in nature. Couple of beers, a few scary stories, and lots of laughing and catching up on how adulthood was going for everyone so far. We may not have achieved what we set out to do, but we were still going to have a good time regardless. We found a small clearing, far enough from the public camping sites to feel isolated. Jay and I stayed on site to pitch the tents, clear some ground for a fire, and get the coolers ready with food and liquid courage. Ben and Eddie went off to collect firewood and generally scan the immediate area around us. We could hear and see Ben and Eddie for most of this time, but there were some spots where the woods get a bit dense. About 20 minutes into setting up the campsite, Jay and I heard a loud crack from the direction directly behind our tents. Like a solid branch being snapped off a tree. It wasn't anything too crazy. But we both looked at each other and go, "Ben's at it again." And we just kind of shrugged it off. They strolled back into camp about 30 minutes later. Eddie looked slightly annoyed, and Ben had a self-satisfied grin on his face with whatever shenanigans he imposed on Eddie while they were out there. Ben walks up to us, with no acknowledgement of our immaculate work of preparing this site. He puts on his intense voice, locks eyes with us, and goes, "You guys are not going to believe what I saw out there in the woods." Jay and I stare at him like, "Well, come on, man. Out with it already." "Nah, I'll fill you in with some cold beers around the fire later, when it's nice and dark." We look over at Eddie, who just rolls his eyes. And then we get on with lighting the fire and settling in for one of those nights that helps you remember the good times. Later, around 10:30 or 11 o'clock, we were a few beers in. The woods around us were pitch dark and silent, the kind of quiet that movies fake with sound editing to make you feel exposed. We were so wrapped up in our own little kumbaya bubble that I didn't really notice how odd it was in that moment. Jay was in the middle of laughing, cracking us up with a story about how his high school girlfriend, Shelley, left him for some other guy 4 months after she went to Penn State, and 5 months after he gave her a promise ring. And just then, it hits us. A heat wave. I mean like an actual wave of heat. And I know what you're thinking. You dorks are sitting around an actual campfire. Of course you felt heat, but this clearly wasn't the warmth of a fire. We could all feel a distinct separate wave of heat blowing in from the right side. We all go quiet for a few seconds and just kind of look at each other, equally puzzled. It felt like that rush of hot air you get when you open an oven, or when you walk up to a large grill in the middle of a backyard barbecue. So at this point, the darkness and silence were like huge red flags, and we were all on alert, just kind of holding our collective breath, waiting for some explanation for the heat wave to magically present itself. Then, Ben looks over at Eddie and gets that same grin on his face as before, then goes, "I told you there was something sinister going on in these woods." He then told us that while they were surveying the area, he and Eddie came across a tree with some stick figure carvings of people on them. Eddie claimed that they were not a big deal, but Ben claims that he saw more trees with crude carvings depicting what he called death scenes. He said that the stick figure bodies were bent in odd angles, hanging upside down, with body parts separated. We were actually starting to get freaked out now, and even Eddie had stopped rolling his eyes, although Ben was clearly a bit on edge as well. I'll be honest, by this time, I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears, and the woods around us became a lot less nostalgic and a lot more threatening. I mean, if we had just heard a strange sound or something like that, we could chalk it up to an animal, or maybe another person passing through. We could make ourselves feel better by bravely yelling, "You better get away from here, we're armed," or some other lie like that. But what the hell causes a wave of heat to move through the woods and past our campsite at night? Just enough time passes for our nerves to almost start settling, and then we heard what sounded like footsteps coming from the surrounding woods. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the denser wooded area. This time, Ben springs up to his feet and says, "There's someone out there. I'm not saying it's Raystown Ray, but I'm telling you, there's someone creeping around out there." He grabs a flashlight and heads toward the sound. None of us argue with him, but no one moves too far from camp either. We all subconsciously huddle closer together, and we're watching Ben's flashlight move through the trees. He then starts putting on a show for us, because the movement from his light looked like he started prancing and skipping around out there. This actually makes us chuckle and relieves some of the pressure that had been built up. But then, the flashlight suddenly goes dark, kind of like when the batteries die. A few unnecessarily long seconds go by, and Ben's light pops back into view. From the looks of it now, he seems to be moving with purpose, directly back towards camp. As he emerges from the trees, he slows his pace and attempts to relax his posture. We all just kind of shoot each other a raised eyebrow as he was walking up. As Ben gets close to us, we can see that he was a few shades paler than what he was when he walked away from the campfire a few minutes ago, although he was trying to hide it. Jay then asked Ben, "What's up, man? Did you see anything?" Then Eddie asked, "Dude, what happened to your flashlight out there?" Ben blinks several times, like he's trying to clear the obvious unease from his face, before telling us he was just goofing around and it just slipped from his hand. I asked him why he looked so frightened. He gives me some line about being drunk and tired. Shortly after, we all agreed to cap the night right there. We all quietly decided against extinguishing the fire and instead stacked some fresh logs on it before zipping ourselves into our tents. When midnight came around, all four of us were already drunk and tired, but none of us are falling asleep, just curled up inside each of our sleeping bags in that state of where you're pretending not to be as tense and keyed up as you really are. Then, the other sounds start up. The best way I can describe it is, picture a dog raising its nose up to sniff the air. When it catches some unfamiliar scent of a person or an animal, that exact sound you hear in your head is what comes from the trees outside of my tent. It was faint, but also distinct. The trees on our perimeter were tall oaks, with no low-hanging branches anywhere near us. This sniffing sound was just odd and out of place. And while I was lying there, rethinking all my life choices, I realized I'd rather be in the lake with old Ray instead of this tent. But somehow, it gets worse. From above Ben and Eddie's tent comes that same sound. Not like it had moved from me to them, but like there was two more of these things, passing signals back and forth. I know how crazy that sounds, but it was exactly like overhearing a hushed conversation. Only instead of words, it was those damn sniffing sounds, answering each other in the dark. I'm not sure how long this went on for. At some point, I passed out from exhaustion, and a bitter acceptance of whatever horrifying shit was going to happen was just gonna happen. But we make it through the night. At sunrise, we break down the camp in record time. I didn't directly ask anyone if they heard the strange sniffing sounds, but I didn't have to. The way that Jay, Ed, and Ben kept nervously staring up at the trees matched exactly what I was doing myself. If anyone knows what could have been making those sniffing sounds in the trees, I've grown less terrified and more curious over the years, so be sure to share your thoughts. We went looking to snap a few photos of a literal lake monster, and somehow ended up with even more than what we bargained for.